Cool. So thanks for hopping on the call, everyone. In terms of our discussion on the on deck label and such from last week, that most of my notes have been recorded in the issue that I've linked in that agenda point. Thanks, Dan. No one wanted to bring up anything else, so all we're going to do is discuss workflow. Originally, the action item was to create a merge request. I think there's a couple of decision points we need to make on whether or not we want to go with the approach of using a label versus milestone, and if we do go with labels, whether we want to continue to use directional milestones in terms of bucketing issues into different stages of refinement. So I think I'm going to kind of complete my notes there, but please continue to kind of add your thoughts there. And then I think we generally have an idea of where our consensus is, but once we kind of finalize that, then I can create the merge request that will contain the proper writing that we'll incorporate into our stage page. So thanks for the conversation there. And so continuing down the list of the thoughts I had in terms of process and workflow, I'd like to hear people's thoughts on the priority labels. There was something, and I guess maybe this is more for Harris to kind of explain to us your rationale behind having these scoped milestone priority labels in contrast to the existing P1 to P4 labels. Yeah, maybe we can start with that.
Okay, so as you know, I've done maybe three planning sessions with the team since I've started, and we've tried a couple of different things, and finally kind of started settling in on an approach that seems to be working for everybody in the last release. So one of the things that we discussed in some of our meetings and some of the kind of retrospectives is kind of the priority and how even how important the P labels are inside a milestone compared to the order of things in the backlog. So if we pull 10 things in and they're in kind of a order that they should pull in, should we be looking at the order in the kind of in the column, or should we be looking at the P labels? And I know that there was at least originally when we talked about it across more than just our group, there was a preference to actually have P labels on items so that everybody can, even if things get shuffled, understand what are the priorities for that particular milestone. So the one thing that I came across the very first time we planned was the fact that all of the issues that created all of the feature issues did not have priority labels. The priority labels came only with security and bugs, and those had rules as far as what priorities they should be. So next time we planned, I added priority labels to the issues that I wanted to get done, and change the priorities in a way. So in a way, as I was kind of designing the milestone and thinking about these are like maybe 20 or 30 issues we can pick from, and I wanted the team to be able to pick the items into the milestone sort of from the backlog loosely in the order that I want them in, but they could probably design their own milestone better than I can, figuring out things that they feel like go together or they can do quickly. So with that in mind, I kind of prioritized the backlog for them to look at in a way that I moved. I created 4 columns in our planning board, and each one had P1 through P4. And then I moved items that I really had to have in that milestone that were more directional or things we promised or they were date driven into the P1, and then send some of the less important things into P2, and things that could slip into the next milestone into P3 and so on. And I got pinged by a few people from security and triage telling me that, hey, could you explain why this P2 became a P3, or why this P1 became something else? And then I realized that the rules that govern the overall prioritization for the entire backlog for GitLab do not always coincide with the priority that I want the team to work on within a particular milestone. So, last time we planned, we decided to use a different set of priorities. And funny enough, I looked in GitLab, and there's another set of priority labels called milestone priority labels. So there's scope to the milestone, and they're also P1 through P4. And if you look at the description for them, it says these are the priorities within the milestone. And that way I was able to set the priorities for the team. I was able to set the order they should work on the items, or the priority order they should work on items within the milestone, without touching the overall priority labels that were assigned sort of by security. And I do take the P1 to P4 as input into my decision on how I prioritize things into milestone. But everybody knows that our backlog has more P1 and P2 issues than we can handle in multiple milestones. And if we just did things in those type of priorities, we would have milestones be have no features. So we kind of use that to see how that works. This is the first time we did it, so we'll probably look at it at the end of this milestone to see if those were useful, if those were confusing, if people even look at those, or do they just kind of pick things from the backlog anyway? So are they relevant? And hopefully we'll be able to tell if that was a step in the right direction or not. But that's kind of all the things we tried, and this is where we are right now, what we're doing. What do you guys think?
So is it essentially like the P labels already existed for security purposes only, right? And we need like some other way of indicating priority?
I think it's a mixed message. I think they do exist in a particular way for security, but then we are allowed to assign those labels to any issues or to all the issues within the backlog. So that's okay. But then if we're really paying attention to those as far as trying to figure out what order we should work things in, then I don't always want to use that order, because for PMs, many other dimensions calculate into the decision on what is a real priority for this milestone and what is not. And there could be a P3 bug or P3 issue out there that is time sensitive and it just needs to get done right now. So it's a must-have. If we're going to deliver something, we have to deliver this issue. But if you're looking at the guidelines on what should be a P1, P2, P3, like that should never be a P1. But I may want to have that be the first thing we do in a milestone. So I feel like in order to have that leeway, I needed a different way to communicate the priorities. And these priority labels are one way to do it, and we'll try and see how that works. The other way would be to really pay attention to the order of things and just have the ranked order of things, and try not to mess that up by moving things up and down, which is really hard with our UI. So if I move something from one column to another, not only am I changing the label, but I'm also re-ranking every time. So wherever I drop it is going to be a new priority, which makes the priority ranking, like stack ranking, very volatile inside our app.
So Harris, I think actually the problem here may be that security is applying priority labels when they shouldn't. Priority labels, my understanding, is that priority labels belong to the product managers. So security, those are engineers. Engineers should be applying severity labels. So there should be no, sort of interference there. So maybe we just need to chat with security and say, hey, could you just switch from using, priority labels to severity labels, and that might solve the whole problem.
Yep, that would probably solve it. So if I had freedom to play with these, and I could set something to be a P1 in this milestone, and then a P3 in this milestone, and a P2 in another milestone, and a P1, like I could even escalate the priority if we're missing that deadline or whatever that is. So if I had the full freedom to just change these and there wasn't a definition I had to follow, then yeah, that would solve it.
Yeah, and if what they want, the security team, is to make sure things get done, right? Like maybe there are rules around the severities instead of a severity plus priority combination, if that makes sense, right? Like maybe we say S1s are the ones that need to be done in, I don't know, what is it, 30 days or?
Well, I think those rules do exist. And I think it's on PMs to make sure that they're prioritizing at least like security fixes. But other than that, like I've personally never had anyone give me flack about using priority labels. And if they did, I would just be like, "Hey, Dan, fight this battle for me." But yeah, I think Dan's right. I think it's up to the PMs to do the scheduling, the prioritization, and on security to do the severity. And you should be taking severity into consideration as you're doing your planning.
Yeah, because in looking at the handbook, right, like priority is the one that indicates like the time frame, and severity is just how broken something is, right? But I think implicitly the severity kind of like tells you a priority.
I mean, you could argue that even though it's not completely broken, if there's a big customer that really needs this fixed, then the prioritization would be higher because we need to get this fixed, else we lose a contract. And even though there is a workaround, right? So, I mean, you could argue either way, whether or not the SLO should be based on the priority or the severity.
Yeah, but I think at the end of the day, Dan's right. Like that should be within the product team, right? Like engineering and product to decide.
Yeah, there's also some another aspect of this, and that is kind of the overall backlog priority versus the milestone priority, which in my mind might sometimes be different. So for example, here there's an overall priority set, and something that is a P2 should be in the next release within 60 days, which kind of implies that maybe all items should have some kind of a priority label, or just only the ones that we decide. Like, at what point do I assign a priority? And then if I do, it seems to indicate a promise, like, similar to how the next 1 to 3 milestones is a promise. Also, assigning something a P2 is a promise that will be done in 60 days. So that seems to conflate a couple of different things there for me.
So a quick question for you too as well, Harris. Did you get any sort of pushback on issues with P labels that weren't bug or security, or is it only on security and bug ones?
No, only on the ones that are automatically set by other people using rules, which is security and bugs.
Yeah, I think that's part of the issue here, right? Because I think the P labels and maybe to a lesser extent S labels are used cross-purposely. I think they started just for security and bugs, and then we've kind of taken advantage of them to fit into our process. Not every group at GitLab uses them to kind of like prioritize issues or to prioritize even kind of within a milestone. I feel as if, and I know security have their own process around P1 or P labels and S labels. I know infrastructure do as well. It feels to me that like the simplest solution here is if we want a way of like prioritizing something in a backlog, we do create our own way of doing it and don't try to cross-purpose something that's being used elsewhere. Like, to me, the P labels don't really set any customer expectation or any customer promise as to when something's going to be delivered. I think milestones do that. I think due dates do that. But P labels are more about our process. And I think that's true with kind of like just generally seeing what P label something has across the whole of GitLab, i.e. security issues and how they're prioritized, but also within a specific milestone as well. I think priorities within a milestone is purely for the kind of people who are working off that board.
I agree.
We can
with
still
all
achieve.
That.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dennis.
I was just going to say, like, to your point, Harris, about understanding the priority across different, like the backlog versus the milestone. I think the milestone already indicates that, right? So if I see that something's in next 1 to 3, those priority labels already kind of provide that sort order versus the list of issues in 13.0 with the priority labels already. So I don't know that it really needs an additional set of labels to indicate that priority. I understand the pushback with regards to security and bug issues, but I think that's ultimately something that we have to be in control anyways, because to your point, is like we do, my understanding is that we need to focus on bug and priority and performance issues above deliverables. Now, I don't think we want to go overboard with that to the point where we don't have any deliverables or like directional features going, because otherwise we have the problem with access where it's like we'd just be overloaded fixing bug and security issues. At the same time, we should be in control of defining what that priority is, because yeah, okay, maybe security or whoever is setting priorities and we should fix this in 30 days. But if we were to follow that religiously, we would never be able to work on feature work. So it should be up to us to commit to when we actually would be able to deliver it. And if that's the case, and if that's something we want to educate, people who are, pushing back on this, then I think that's okay, because it makes no sense to leave something as a P1 and pretend that we'll return it in 30 days when we won't, right?
Yeah, it sounds like part of it, I think, to Dennis's point, is just setting expectations. Like, even when I change milestones, I try to leave a comment as to why I'm changing it from maybe a concrete milestone to a directional one. And in this case, like if it's programmatically assigned a P label and you know that there's folks watching it, you can just say, hey, I'm moving this to P3 because P2 isn't feasible with what we need to ship. And it doesn't seem like this is, whatever your justification might be. And at least then there's like a dialogue, and maybe you'll realize something you didn't know. But best case, they'll be like, oh, okay, I get it. It's still a priority. It's just slightly less than. Seems like maybe an approach.
Yeah, honestly, my preference, right, and what I've done in the past is just like, I just stack rank what is in the milestone, right? Like based on my own criteria, right? Like time sensitivity, like feature, bug, etc. Right? I just stack rank them and just like work with the dev team and say, hey, in general, take from the top and work your way down, right? And that's what I've done, and it's simple, right? And without like labels and like categories. I would love to be able to do that, right? Taking into account the P and S labels without like bucketizing so much on what's in the milestone.
So, I mean, I guess what are we looking to, I feel like we should be able to change, like priorities do change, right? Like, one of the ideas about, having the milestone labels to indicate that it is a different priority than what it was before. But if that's the case, then I feel like it's a natural course for us just to change the P1s to the P4s as it goes through triage and prioritization and finally getting scheduled into a milestone. Unless there's some issue for quality to be able to track the original priority of a bug or security thing. But then I don't know.
I believe there is, Dennis. I believe that, like, so I might be wrong on this, but my understanding was that the P labels like were primarily owned by kind of like security and quality. Because I think we use them to kind of like check SLOs as to if something's a P1, how long did it actually take to get it delivered? If something was created as a P1 6 months ago and it still hasn't been done and it's been pushed down to a P2 or a P3 because of that, even though kind of we still deem it as one of the most important things that we could do, then I think we lose some sort of visibility of that. That's why kind of my vote has been that kind of like we wouldn't use P labels as they exist now in prioritization kind of within the team. I've just added something to the document, and you could probably argue that some of these like conflate into the same things, but there's like 6 different like meanings or 6 different ways that you can use P labels at the moment. I can think off the top of my head. So like the security team use them. I think there's a lot of overlap between how kind of they're used to like how we triage bugs with them. Infrastructure have their own way in terms of kind of like production issues that we run into. Then there's kind of the overall backlog prioritization thing that we were talking about. We then have a slightly different meaning for how we then use P labels within a milestone, because kind of it's specific to that milestone. And further, in the managed part of the handbook, we also say that within a milestone, a P label also refers to the predictability of something being delivered. I guess like with this whole conversation, it's like we can't satisfy, I think, all of those requirements with one single label. And
that's totally fair. I think what would help me understand it better in terms of whether or not it makes sense to have one or more ways to note priority is to really clarify who owns the P labels and how much we should be following those SLOs at the same time. Because to your point, if we've got a P1 sitting there for a long time, but we keep shuffling all the other deliverables around, then I think there's another issue there, right? So Like,
Well,
I
if
understand.
you ask, they're gonna say we should be following them.
Right. But I mean, I don't think, I think if we don't answer that, or at least define that to some degree of like, we commit 70% of our milestone to fixing these things or whatever that number is, then we're always going to be bouncing back and forth with conflicting priorities.
And
I'm thinking
for what
about
it's
like,
worth, these SLOs, I mean, for a lot of my backlog, which is 300 plus items, have been missed by a long mile, like a year. So
right.
I'm not even pretending like I can deliver any of these SLOs. They're really meaningless in my process, other than like, I know if something was entered 3 years ago, it may actually be less priority right now than something is entered right now, because that thing may have just gone away. So some of it, like the SLOs, are useless to me in the whole picture.
Right. But creating a second set of labels continues to devalue that, doesn't it? Like, you're at that point, we're kind of deliberately acknowledging that we don't respect the SLOs and priority labels. And if that's the case, then why do we look at them at all?
Because
It depends what that second label is for,
We're not doing
I think.
Like that would be the truth. Like if we were to speak the truth, then yes.
That's what I'm, that's
So
what
for
I'm
example,
asking.
you
Like,
It
could-
can be like the true priority labels.
Because you
That's what I'm asking.
You could still honor something that's deemed a P1 security, but say it's a P2 within our milestone because we're confident we're gonna get to it and kind of hit it on time. I feel like you're right, Dennis. I feel like we do need to kind of like define who the owner of that label is and what its primary purpose is. One of the things I was talking to Harris about in our one-on-one the other day was like, how much autonomy do we have within each individual group? And I think some of that depends on like, ultimately, what are the things that can't change? What are the things that are fixed outside of the group? So things like P labels. And as far as I've understood, that P labels are primarily for the purpose of security, like at the number one, and then probably for bug purpose and infrastructure afterwards. And from a product point of view, product prioritization, we've probably come right at the bottom. And if that is the case, and if like those labels are not movable because security have their own process around them, it then would seem quite reasonable that if we did decide in each milestone we want to have 4 different categories of priority, then I think creating our own label to do that seems fairly reasonable to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Totally
I think
okay with that. I think, sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
I was going to say to the autonomy point too, like even within our groups, right? Because if you ask me, my preference would be like we load the milestone with what we know we can achieve, we stack rank it, and I'm done, right? Like I personally don't want to like put things in P buckets, and like if other people want to, like that's fine, but my preference would be not to do that, right? So
I feel the same.
That's the
I think
autonomy
it
part.
makes sense.
yeah.
I share
Well,
that
yeah.
opinion, and further down the
Because-
agenda, I actually added a note which references the prioritization section in the managed part of handbook, where I think overall, like we used to try to deliver like 70% of what we committed to, and then we had our stretch goals, but we decided to scrap that, and what we wanted was a bit more predictability to say, let's schedule what we think we can deliver. But it seems that our documentation around those P labels then kind of negates that, because it says if something's a P4, we think there's only a 50% chance of it being delivered within that milestone. So I would support that as well, Melissa. I don't completely buy the value of having P labels within a particular milestone. I think it does like give you quite a nice visual of being able to see like what the higher priorities are, as opposed to one long list. But I'm not sure that's really worth the value of like the investment we take into splitting them out.
I guess we should commit to eventually we should commit to the entire, like whatever we have scheduled in the milestone. Eventually that's what we're gonna ship in that milestone, and we should be probably a little more conservative on the planning side, and then we don't need P labels at all because everything has the same priority in that milestone and we can commit to that. Besides, I guess we also have the kickoff highlight, which also indicates priorities, because those are the things that we should focus on delivering in that milestone. So I wonder if we need additional levels of priority besides the kickoff highlight at all.
I'm with Melissa also on one point, which is if this is what works for you, then you should have the autonomy to do what works for you, right? So my question is really, do we need to agree on process at the managed level, like at the section level? Is it is it a stage level, or should it be a section level, or should it be an overall? What is the appropriate level for us to agree on the same process? And my default is to give teams autonomy and give groups autonomy to decide what they're doing. And if we run into problems with that, as in we can no longer report on what's being done because everybody has a different state for things are done. Some people close it, some people leave it open with a label or whatever. Like if there are reasons for us to standardize on things, then we discuss those problems. Like, hey, in order for us to be able to, I don't know, do X or CX, we need to have visibility into this, and therefore let's come up with a reason. So I don't know if we are solving an actual problem by standardizing on this process.
I agree with that. And I think having a way of having a list of the things that have to be, I think, and then anything else you can have autonomy on within a group. So one of the things that has to be is if you merge something in a milestone, the issue gets assigned to that milestone. So that's a really obvious one, but everyone agrees to that. That's one of the things that has to work. No group at GitLab would just work rogue on a bunch of issues without assigning any milestones and just ship what they want. But I think there's very few of those things. I think you're right, Harris, as to if we do have those, it would be good to know why and at what sort of level they're being enforced at.
And that's what I want to understand is if we have a global constraint as an organization to commit to some degree to these SLOs, and if not, let's figure out what works for us, whether that's at a stage or a group level. But I would like to figure that out before we have, import maybe doesn't respect SLOs at all, whereas analytics and access do, or compliance has their own way of listing issues without P labels at all. And one, it's if we want the ability to do that, that's fine. Let's document it. But I want to understand what we look at in terms of do we respect those at all? Because I would imagine, if a group just didn't look at that at all, probably someone would take issue with that from senior management. That's my feeling, at least.
And I agree with that as well, Dennis. I think from my perspective, the P labels as set by security are enforced across the organization. As far as I'm aware, I've always respected them. Now that doesn't mean we've always been able to deliver on them. Quite the opposite, actually, because of the big backlog that we've had. But it's not clear, right? It's not clear, to me, in one place to say you must you must consider this as part of your process. Or maybe it is, because I think there are parts in the handbook where we talk about priority, and we always say that security comes first.
Right, first, but not as a stack rank. It is a list of 10 things that we take into account, and things on top are more important than things below it, but it is not so that everything that is in that first priority sentence has to be done before we ever get to anything that's in the second priority list. And that's kind of where, so that's the input that I take into prioritization. And definitely if I have an S1 or a P1 issue, that is going into the next milestone. But that's that's kind of input into prioritization, one of the inputs. So, not that they're not being respected. Actually, we do try really hard, and we manage a lot of times with new issues, incoming issues, but there's a lot of issues in backlog that have been missed. And so we don't always deliver on these. That just has to be, we need to be able to say that and be okay with it.
Yeah, and I think that is largely how it works, right? Because we all have stable counterparts. We have stable counterparts in security and quality who are there to kind of argue why it's important and to try and hit the sort of SLOs that they're responsible for. And as you say, that does form input. It doesn't dictate exactly what gets done, because if it did for the last year, we would have only worked on security issues in access. And I think everyone's obviously far more pragmatic than that.
Would anyone like to work on the clarification of these points in terms of defining the fixed constraints we have?
Are you asking to try to come up with a list of things that are fixed constraints right now?
Not right now. I'm just in terms of following up on this so we can kind of keep the momentum going in terms of, because I kind of just want to understand which can just confirm, like, do we respect SLOs only for bug and security? And then at that point, which groups do we align at all on how we approach prioritization after that or not? What I'm trying to get to is, like, at some point, if I look at import, I'll say they're doing the best they can, but if there's 100 P1 bugs, not all of them are going to get there, and they may get to the point where, like, that's just how we behave with SLOs. That's fine. And I just want to know how every group behaves at some point.
Yeah, I think that might be another way to approach this issue, right? In terms of, we've got kind of quite a long list of different things we want to discuss: workflow labels, priority labels, severity labels. And it might be quite interesting that if we can get a list of the things that we know, like, are like global constraints or stage-wise constraints, each product manager could then, I would be quite interested to hear from each product manager in terms of what their vision for their group would be. Like, how, like, if you have full autonomy on everything else, what would the process look like? And would that be scoped prioritization labels that are different from P labels? Would that be one big stack rank list, as Melissa said? And I'd be quite keen to hear everyone's kind of opinion on that.
Yeah, because it sounds like we do have our own different preferences. So I would like those, like, actually clearly identified. And if that's the case, then that's totally fine. But we also do need to be cognizant of, like, you know, what you are doing may not respect the SLOs. And if that's the case, then that's just something we have to make clear to other people as well, that, you know, security has to be aware that, you know, your priority labels are inputs, but not, you know, forced guidance or things like that. We can continue this in the chat, perhaps. So I know we're over time. Cool. Thanks for the good conversation again. Yeah, we'll follow this up with some more action items, and then we'll go from there. It's good seeing everyone.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Good chat, everyone. Thank you.